The hegemony of unified spheres does not deal in miracles. It deals in logarithms, biological efficiency ratings, and the cold, unyielding finality of the archive. In the great pressurized halls of Zenith Hub 42, existence is not a birthright. It is a clerical status. If you are breathing but uncatalogued, you are a glitch. If you are dead but still on the active roster, you are a liability. My name is Kalen Voss, and for 32 years, I have been the man who ensures that the ghosts stay buried. As the senior archivist of terminal records, my office is a sterile cube of white light and humming data spires. I spend my days reviewing the slow decline of star systems and the inevitable silencing of voices. I have processed the final notice for civilizations that spanned a dozen moons, and I have done so without a flicker of heartbeat acceleration. To an archivist, extinction is simply a file being moved from one server to another. Archivist Voss, a voice crackled through the comms. It was Unit 9, my assigned synthetic assistant. Unit 9 spoke with the rapid-fire efficiency of a machine that considered silence a waste of processing power. We have a structural anomaly in the docking queue. A vessel has requested clearance using an override code that hasn't been recognized by the central mainframe in 1,200 years. I didn't look up from the biological continuity report of the Kelmorian hives. Redirect them to the Salvage Division 9, likely a long-range scavenger ship with a corrupted transponder. Use the standard protocol for unregistered hardware. Negative, Archivist, Unit 9 replied. I heard the faint whirring of its internal fans, a sign that it was accessing deep storage memory. The hardware is unknown, the aesthetics are non-standard, but the code is species ID 404. My fingers froze above the haptic interface. I slowly raised my head. Species ID 404. The number was etched into the mind of every archivist. It was the mark of the Great Erasure. 1,200 years ago, the species originating from System 0, the third planet of a yellow dwarf star, had been declared biologically non-viable. The hegemony census teams of that era had reported a world choking on its own toxins, a race fragmented by petty tribalism and resource wars. The final verdict had been self-terminated. Check the backup servers, I said, my voice sounding strangely hollow in the quiet room. The Terrans were liquidated. Their files are locked in the terminal vault. Nobody survives a Category 1 extinction event. They are currently holding at 3 kilometers from Docking Bay 7, Unit 9 continued, ignoring my skepticism. They have bypassed our electronic jamming. They aren't shouting or making threats. They sent a data packet. It's written in an archaic dialect of hegemony standard, but the header is clear. What does it say? Unit 9 paused, its optical sensors flickering from blue to amber. It says, apologies for the radio silence. We had some cleaning up to do, requesting permission to come home. I stood up, the chair sliding back with a sharp hiss. That's impossible. System 0 was reclaimed by the expansionist wing 900 years ago. It's a resource strip zone. There's nothing there but dust and automated refineries. Tell that to the ship, Unit 9 remarked. It is currently painting our sensors with a signal strength that suggests a core of immense power. It's not a ghost, Archivist Voss. It's 40,000 metric tons of solid matter. I grabbed my coat, the fabric heavy with the scent of ozone and old data tapes. My heart, usually a steady ignored clock, was suddenly pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. In the hegemony, we are taught that history is a straight line, a ladder of progress that discards the weak as it climbs. We are taught that once a species falls off that ladder, they are gone forever. I began to walk, my boots echoing against the polished floors of the main transit corridor. I passed dozens of different species, the tall, reed-like vylons, the multi-limbed chora, the crystalline entities from the outer rim. They all moved with the quiet, orderly purpose of the hegemony. None of them knew that the rules of the universe were being rewritten at Docking Bay 7. Unit 9, I spoke into my wrist link as I stepped onto the high-speed rail. Keep this off the general net. If the expansionist wing finds out someone is knocking from a dead system, they'll scramble the interceptors before the airlock even cycles. Understood, Kalen. But you should know, the ship's name is not a number. It has a literal designation. And it's called the persistence of memory. I watched the stars blur through the transit window. Out there, in the deep black, something had refused to die. Something had crawled out of the grave we had dug for them and spent 1,000 years deciding what to say when they returned. As the rail slowed down at the docking sector, I felt a strange, terrifying sensation. It was hope. And in the hegemony, hope was the most dangerous glitch of all. Docking Bay 7 was usually reserved for high-priority diplomatic shuttles or the occasional heavy freighter carrying rare gases from the gas giants. Today it was a theater of the absurd. I arrived to find the security detail in a state of organized confusion, a hegemony term for panic that follows all protocols but achieves nothing. 6 armored sentinels stood with their pulse rifles leveled at the inner airlock door, their posture rigid and fearful. "Archivist Voss," the lead guard grunted, his helmet display glowing red. "This area is restricted. We have an unidentified entity in the tube. Status: hostile until proven otherwise." "If they were hostile, Captain, we wouldn't be standing here talking about it," I said, pushing past him. I looked through the reinforced observation port. The ship was unlike anything in the hegemony's catalog. Most of our vessels followed the form follows function doctrine. Sharp angles for military ships, bloated spheres for cargo, sleek needles for scouts. This vessel, the persistence of memory, looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its hull was a deep, iridescent charcoal, with veins of glowing silver running along the length like a nervous system. It was curved in ways that defied standard aerodynamics, and the surface seemed to pulse with a slow, rhythmic light. "It looks alive," I whispered. "It is, in a sense," Unit 9 said, appearing at my side. The AI had transferred itself into a mobile drone unit. "Biomechanical integration. I am detecting heat signatures consistent with life support, but the atmosphere inside the vessel is remarkably clean. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, 3% higher in purity than our own station standards." The airlock hissed. It wasn't the harsh mechanical clank of our systems, but a soft exhaling sound, like a giant taking a breath. The heavy steel doors slid open, and a mist of cooling vapor spilled into the bay. 3 figures walked out of the fog. I had spent my entire life looking at holographic reconstructions of ancient Terrans. I knew the biological data: bipedal, forward-facing eyes, fragile skin, high capacity for violence. But the beings standing before me were a far cry from the starving, desperate creatures described in the extinction files. The woman in the lead was tall, her skin a deep bronze that seemed to catch the sterile light of the bay. She wore a uniform of dark, flexible material that lacked any visible seams. There were no medals, no gaudy insignias, only a small silver pin on her collar shaped like a budding leaf. Her hair was cropped short, and her eyes, a startling, clear amber, scanned the room with a calm, analytical intensity. The man to her left was younger, with a chaotic mop of dark hair and a bag slung over one shoulder. He looked around with a grin that could only be described as inappropriate for a first contact scenario. To her right stood an older man, his hair the color of starlight, his face etched with lines of experience that suggested he had seen the birth and death of sons. The woman stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the deck plating. She stopped exactly 2 meters from the security line. "I am Commander Ilara Vance of the Terran Sovereign Reach," she said. Her voice was steady, resonant, and spoken in a dialect of hegemony standards so perfect it made my own speech sound like a provincial grunt. "We've had a bit of a long walk to get here. I believe we are overdue for a census update." Captain Drax, the lead guard, didn't lower his rifle. "Species ID 404 is listed as extinct. You are trespassing in hegemony space. Identify your point of origin, or we will be forced to employ lethal measures." The young man with the bag let out a short, sharp laugh. "Lethal measures? Buddy, we just spent the last 3 centuries terraforming a planet that was literally on fire. Your little light show toys don't scare us." "Jack, stow it," Ilara said without looking back. She turned her gaze to me. She didn't look at the guards or the rifles. She looked at the man with the archivist's sigil on his chest. "You are the record keeper?" I am Kalen Voss, I replied, stepping in front of the captain's gun, senior archivist. And while I don't wish to be rude, the records state that your world, System Zero, collapsed into an uninhabitable wasteland 12 centuries ago. How are you here? Ilara Vance took a small step closer. I could smell something on her. Not the metallic tang of a space station, but something fresh like wet earth and blooming flowers. It was a smell I had only ever read about in the sensory archives of dead worlds. The hegemony looked at us when we were at our worst, she said softly. You saw a house on fire and decided to close the door and wait for the ashes to cool. You weren't wrong about the fire, Kalen. We were burning. We were greedy, we were foolish, and we were dying. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a small glass-like sphere. Inside, a tiny glowing seed floated in a suspension of blue liquid. But you underestimated the one thing your algorithms can't calculate, she continued. We didn't just survive the fire. We learned how to use the heat to forge something better. We didn't die out. We grew up. And we've been watching you for a very, very long time. Watching us? Captain Drax barked. Our deep space sensors cover every sector. Your sensors see what they expect to see. The older man spoke up, his voice like gravel. They see empty space because that's what your maps told them was there. We've been living in the empty zones for 200 years, building, learning, and waiting for the right moment to say hello again. Ilara Vance held out the sphere to me. We didn't come here for war, archivist, and we didn't come here to beg for our old systems back. We came because the hegemony is dying. Your charts show stability, but your biology shows stagnation. You're running out of room, running out of resources, and running out of time. I looked at the seed in the sphere. It was pulsing with a soft green light, a rhythm that matched the ship docked behind her. We brought snacks, the young one, Jax added, reaching into his bag and pulling out a small wrapped bar. He tossed it to Unit 9, who caught it with a mechanical click. It's a high-protein oat blend with honey from the new Himalayan hives. Better than that gray paste you guys eat on the middecks, I bet. Commander, I said, ignoring the snack, you realize that by walking onto this station, you have surrendered yourselves to hegemony law. As an extinct species, you have no rights. You are, legally speaking, salvage. Ilara Vance smiled. It wasn't a smile of submission. It was the smile of a predator that had just walked into a trap and found it made of straw. We know exactly what your laws say, Kalen Voss. That's why we brought 4,000 pages of legal precedents, historical corrections, and a very detailed list of every time the hegemony violated its own charter to seize our territory while we were dead. She tilted her head, her amber eyes locking onto mine. The ghost of humanity is done haunting the fringes. We're moving back into the house, and we'd like to start with a formal reinstatement hearing. Now, where do we go to get a decent cup of coffee? It's been a long 1,000 years. As I led them toward the high-security hospitality suite, I felt the weight of 1,200 years of lies beginning to crack. The hegemony was built on the idea that once something is gone, it is forgotten. But as I looked at the 3 Terrans walking through our halls with the confidence of gods, I realized that some things are too stubborn to stay in the past. They weren't just back, they were better. And the universe was about to find out that extinct was just a word for preparing for a comeback. The hospitality suite in Sector 4 was a masterpiece of architectural gaslighting. It was designed to feel like a luxury penthouse while functioning with the efficiency of a maximum security containment cell. The walls were made of semi-translucent opal glass that shifted colors based on the occupants' perceived stress levels, a feature intended to soothe, but which usually only served to remind the prisoner that the station was monitoring their pulse. The furniture was ergonomically perfect for 12 different species, which meant it was slightly uncomfortable for everyone. I stood outside the reinforced entry gate, watching the stress walls of the suite pulse a steady, defiant green. The humans weren't stressed. They were, according to the biometric sensors Unit 9 was feeding into my neural link, remarkably bored. Archivist Voss, Unit 9 said, its voice shimmering in the air beside me. The drone was hovering at shoulder height, its optical lens rotating as it scanned the internal atmosphere of the suite. High Counselor Verne is requesting an immediate situational report. The legal department has also issued a stay of existence order. They are currently debating whether or not the biological entities inside are, In fact, humans, or merely sophisticated biological simulacrums, designed to trigger a territorial crisis. A stay of existence, I whispered, leaning my head against the cold metal of the doorframe. That's a new one, even for the hegemony. They're literally trying to legislate the air out of their lungs. The legal logic is sound, Kalen, Unit 9 countered. If species ID 404 is extinct, then by definition, anyone claiming to be a member of that species is a falsification. You cannot be what does not exist. Therefore, they are not humans. They are anomalies. And the hegemony has very specific protocols for disposing of anomalies. Open the door, 9, I said, ignoring the machine's grim logic. I'm not here to dispose of anyone. I'm here to figure out how a dead race learned to speak hegemony standard better than the people who invented it. The door slid back, and I stepped into a room that smelled of mountain air and something sweet, like honeyed tobacco. Commander Alara Vance was sitting at the central table, her boots up on the edge of the polished surface. She was reading a digital tablet that appeared to have been jury-rigged with human hardware. The young man, Jax, was lying on a floating couch, tossing a small metallic ball into the air and catching it with terrifyingly fast reflexes. The older man, who I now knew was named Silas, was standing by the observation window, staring out at the docking rings of Zenith Hub 42. The brass is getting twitchy, I see, Ilara said, not looking up from her screen. I can hear the chatter of your security teams in the hallway. They're debating whether to gas the room or send in the lawyers. Personally, I'd bet on the lawyers. Gassing us is messy, and your ventilation system has a feedback loop in Sector 4 that would probably poison the Vylons in the next wing. I blinked. How could you possibly know about the ventilation feedback loop? That information is restricted to the maintenance tier. Jax caught the ball and sat up, a wolfish grin on his face. Your encryption is basically a screen door in a hurricane, archivist. We've had a couple of centuries to poke at your signal architecture. Once we figured out the base 12 mathematics you use for your subspace bursts, the rest was just heavy lifting. Your secure network is about as private as a shout in a canyon. Jax, don't be a gearhead, Silas murmured from the window. He turned around, his eyes tired but sharp. Forgive the boy, Archivist Voss. He hasn't spent much time around people who still believe in secrets. It makes him a bit boastful. I walked to the table and sat across from Alara. I felt like I was sitting across from a mountain, something ancient, immovable, and fundamentally indifferent to my presence. Commander Vance, I need you to understand the gravity of your situation. The hegemony doesn't like being wrong, especially not 12 centuries worth of wrong. Right now, the High Counselor is looking for any reason to declare you a biological threat. If you want a seat at the table, you have to stop acting like you've already won. Alara finally set the tablet down. She leaned forward, her amber eyes locking onto mine. We haven't won anything yet, Kalen. We just showed up for the game. But let's be real here. You've seen our ship. You've seen our data. You know we're not simulacrums. You're an archivist. Your whole life is built on the pursuit of the definitive record. Are you going to let a bunch of bureaucrats tell you that the sun isn't shining when it's burning right in front of your face? The record says you are dead, I said, my voice shaking slightly. The census report from 1,203 years ago was signed by 6 different departments. It was audited. It was final. And who benefited from that finality? Ilara asked. Her voice was low, dangerous. When we were declared extinct, what happened to the Sol system? What happened to the 3 mining colonies in the asteroid belt? What happened to the research outposts on the moons of the gas giants? I felt a chill run down my spine. They were reclaimed under the Territorial Acquisition Act of the Hegemony. Exactly, Alara said. She stood up and began to pace the room, her movements fluid and predatory. It's a neat little trick, isn't it? Find a species in crisis, wait for them to hit the bottom of the curve, and then just check a box, say they're gone. It saves you the trouble of a war. It saves you the mess of a diplomatic negotiation. You just wait for the body to get cold, and then you move into the house. That is a very serious accusation, Commander, I said. You are suggesting a coordinated conspiracy involving the highest levels of the hegemony administration. I'm suggesting that your civilization is a machine that eats space, Jax chimed in, tossing his ball again. And it doesn't like it when the food starts talking back. It's FUBAR, man. Your whole system is rigged. Jax, enough, Ilara snapped. She turned back to me. Kalen, we didn't come here to start a revolution. We came here because we have something you need. But we won't give it to a ghost government that refuses to acknowledge we're alive. You want the truth about how we survived? You want to know what happened during the reckoning? Then get us a hearing, a real one, before the Tribunal of Souls. The Tribunal of Souls, the highest judicial body in the hegemony. It hadn't been convened in 350 years. To call for it was to challenge the very foundation of our social order. I am a subcoordinator, I said, shaking my head. I don't have the authority to convene the tribunal. Maybe not, Alara said, leaning over the table until her face was inches from mine. But you have the files. You have the original census report. And I think, Archivist Voss, that if you look closely at that report, not the summary but the raw data, you're going to find something that doesn't add up, something that makes your skin crawl. She sat back and crossed her arms. Go back to your vault, Kalen. Do your job. Find the glitch. Because if you don't, the next ship that comes into this bay won't be called the Persistence of Memory. It'll be called something a lot less friendly. And we really don't want to go that route. We're tired of fighting for every breath of air. I stood up, my mind reeling. I looked at Silas, who was watching me with a look of profound pity. I looked at Jax, who was already back to his games. And finally, I looked at Alara Vance, a woman who had walked out of the grave of history to demand a future. I will look, I said. As I walked out of the room, the door hissing shut behind me, Unit 9 hovered close to my ear. Kalen, your heart rate is 110 beats per minute. Your cortisol levels are rising. I must advise against further unsanctioned contact with the anomalies. They aren't anomalies, 9, I said, my voice barely a whisper as I walked toward the transit rail. They're a mirror, and I don't think I like what I see. The transit ride back to the Central Archive took exactly 7 minutes, but it felt like 7 years. The station was humming with the news. Even if the High Counselor had tried to suppress the information, the physical presence of the persistence of memory was impossible to ignore. Every viewing port was crowded with people trying to catch a glimpse of the charcoal-colored ship. There was a tension in the air, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. I reached the vault and bypassed the standard security protocols, using my senior override. I didn't go to the active servers. I went to the deep storage thermal layers where the final notices were kept. These were the physical backups, the hard copy data crystals that were meant to survive even if the station's power failed. Unit 9, I said, sitting down at the terminal. Isolate the census file for species ID 404. I want the raw telemetry from the survey vessel Hegemon 7, not the translated reports, the raw, unfiltered sensory data. That data is heavily encrypted, Kalen, Unit 9 warned. Accessing it without a secondary authorization from the Bureau of Biological Status is a breach of Protocol Alpha 9. Do it anyway, I said, my fingers flying over the haptic keys. I'll take the heat. Just get me the files. Copy that, the AI replied, its voice taking on a strangely human tone of resignation. Decrypting now. It will take approximately 12 minutes to bypass the secondary firewalls. 12 minutes. I sat in the dark vault, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 civilizations. I thought about what Alara had said. You saw a house on fire and decided to close the door. Was that what we were? A galaxy of fire watchers who preferred the silence of ashes to the noise of survival? I had spent my career cataloging endings. I had never once considered that an ending could be a lie. Kalen, Unit 9 said, interrupting my thoughts, the decryption is complete. I am displaying the raw telemetry now. But there is a significant discrepancy. What is it? The survey vessel Hegemon 7 reported a 98% biological collapse on the planet's surface, Unit 9 said. However, the atmospheric scans in the raw data show a massive spike in localized carbon capture activity. There were also structured radio bursts originating from the southern hemisphere, signals that were omitted from the final report. I stared at the screen. The graphs were clear. While the summary had painted a picture of a planet in its final death throes, the raw data showed something else entirely. It showed a species that was fighting back. It showed cities that were being rebuilt under domes. It showed a desperate, ingenious attempt to save a world. And then I saw it. The signature at the bottom of the raw data log. It wasn't just the census team. There was a secondary authorization code from the Territorial Acquisitions Division. They were there, I whispered, the horror of it finally sinking in. They were on the ship with the census team. They saw that the humans were surviving, and they decided to bury the report. Wait, Unit 9 said, its sensors flashing. There is more. I am detecting a secondary file attached to the telemetry. It's a message, Kalen, but it wasn't sent by the humans. It was sent by the captain of the Hegemon 7 to an encrypted address in the Central Hegemony Command. I opened the file. Right. It was a short, audio-only recording. The voice was distorted by 12 centuries of static, but the words were clear. The Terrans are refusing to die. They are stabilizing the core and beginning large-scale atmospheric restoration. If we wait another 50 years, they will be back in the local space lanes. Recommendation: proceed with the extinction classification immediately. Seal the sector before they can broadcast and appeal to the outer rim. We need those mineral deposits for the Phase 3 expansion. Let them rot in the dark. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a long, shaky exhale. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't even just bureaucratic laziness. It was an execution. And for 1,200 years, we had been the ones standing over the grave, making sure the dirt stayed flat. The archive vault felt colder now, as if the shadows of the dead were leaning in to see the evidence of their own betrayal. I looked at the audio file, the waveform shimmering like a jagged scar on my screen. This was the smoking gun, as the old Terran phrase went. But a gun was only useful if you had the courage to pull the trigger. Unit 9, I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. Save this. Triple encrypt it. If anyone tries to access my terminal, I want this file routed to a dead drop in the waste management tier. Do not let the central mainframe scrub this. Kalen, you are engaging in high treason, Unit 9 said. The drone descended to my eye level, its lens pulsing a soft, worried blue. The punishment for subverting a territorial acquisition record is permanent neural remapping. You will lose everything. Your career, your memories, your identity. I've already lost my identity, 9, I said, looking at the screen. I thought I was a seeker of truth. Turns out I was just a glorified janitor for a crime scene. I can't stay frosty while this is sitting in my head. I stood up and walked toward the exit. I need to talk to Alara. I need to know the rest of it. How did they do it? How do you survive a death sentence from the most powerful empire in the galaxy? The commander is likely asleep, Unit 9 noted. It is currently 2400 hours, station time. She's not asleep, I said. None of them are. You don't wait 1,000 years to sleep. I made my way back to Sector 4, avoiding the main corridors. I moved through the maintenance conduits, my boots clanging softly on the metal grates. I felt like a ghost myself, haunting the machine I had served for 3 decades. When I reached the hospitality suite, the guards had been replaced by a pair of automated sentry drones, a sign that High Counselor Varn was tightening the noose. I used a maintenance bypass to enter the suite from the service entrance. The room was dark, except for a single pool of light near the observation window. Alara was there, staring out at the stars. She didn't turn around when I entered. You found it, she said. It wasn't a question. How long have you known? I asked, walking into the light. Since the day it happened, she said, her voice heavy with 1,000 years of bitterness. We had a deep space array on the dark side of our moon. It was an old clunky thing, mostly used for tracking asteroids, but it picked up the burst from the Hegemon 7. We heard them, Kalen. We heard them decide that we weren't worth saving. We heard them tell the galaxy that we were already dead while we were still screaming for help. I looked down at my hands. I am so sorry. I know that means nothing now, but it means everything, she said, finally turning to face me. And it means nothing. Words are just vibrations in the air, archivist. What matters is what you do with the silence that follows. She sat down on the edge of the window ledge, her silhouette framed by the glowing rings of the station. You asked how we survived. You want the diplomatic version? We pulled together. We innovated. We sacrificed. But you're a man of details. You want the gritty truth. I want to understand, I said. The reckoning, she began, her eyes distant. That's what we call the first 200 years after the hegemony left. It wasn't a glorious rebirth. It was a nightmare. The planet was a fever dream of storms and rising tides. We lost billions, not to the fire, but to the despair. When you know the whole galaxy has turned its back on you, it's hard to find a reason to plant a garden. It's hard to find a reason to have a child. She looked at the small silver pin on her collar, the budding leaf. We almost did it, you know? We almost fulfilled your prophecy. We were at each other's throats, fighting over the last scraps of clean water, the last seeds of non-toxic grain. We were a species of ghosts just waiting for the lights to go out. What changed? A woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, Silas said, stepping out of the shadows. He had been listening from the corner. She was a biologist, a dreamer, someone who believed that life isn't just a biological process, but a choice. She developed the first iteration of the bioseed technology, but it wasn't just a machine, it was a philosophy. The philosophy of the persistence of memory, Ilara added. She told us that if we forgot who we were, if we forgot that we were once artists and poets and explorers, then we really would be dead. She said the hegemony didn't kill us. They just gave us an excuse to kill ourselves. And we had to decide if we were going to accept that excuse. She walked over to a small table and picked up a glass of water. She held it up to the light. We stopped fighting over the water and started cleaning it. We stopped building weapons and started building domes. It took 6 generations of people who never saw the sky, who lived their entire lives in underground bunkers, working on a world they would never see. They did the heavy lifting, Kalen. They lived in the dark so that one day we could walk in the light. The bioseed, I said, remembering the glowing sphere from the docking bay. What is it, really? It's a terraforming engine, Silas explained, but it's also a bridge. It uses a symbiotic fungal network to rapidly break down toxins and replace them with life-sustaining minerals. But more than that, it's a shared consciousness. When we seed a world, we aren't just planting trees. We're planting the history of our people. Every seed contains a data shroud of our music, our literature, our failures, and our triumphs. The planet becomes a living library. I was stunned. You turned your entire world into a record? The hegemony archives things in cold servers, Ilara said, her eyes flashing with a sudden fierce pride. We archive things in the soil. We archive them in the air. When you walk through a forest on New Earth, you aren't just walking through trees. You're walking through the heartbeat of a billion people who refuse to be forgotten. She stepped close to me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Her touch was warm, human, and startlingly real. We didn't come here to reclaim our old systems, Kalen. We don't need them. We found other worlds further out, in the deep black where your ships don't go. We've built a civilization that doesn't need to eat space to survive. Then why come back at all, I asked. Why risk everything to walk into the lion's den? Because the lion is starving, Ilara said softly. We've seen your transmissions. We've seen the reports from your outer rim colonies. Your soil is failing. Your biological diversity is dropping. You're hitting the same tipping points we hit 12 centuries ago. And unlike us, you don't have anyone left to turn to. You've declared everyone else extinct or irrelevant. She looked at the window, toward the millions of lives humming inside Zenith Hub 42. We didn't come back for revenge. We came back because we're the only ones who know how to stop the fire. We came to offer you the bioseed. We came to offer you a way to live without destroying everything you touch. But the High Counselor will never accept it, I said, the weight of the hegemony's ego pressing down on me. To accept your help is to admit they were wrong, to admit they were criminals. They'd rather watch the galaxy burn than lose their standing. That's why we need you, Kalen, Silas said. We can provide the technology. We can provide the truth. But we need someone from the inside to open the door. We need someone who still believes that the record should reflect reality, not just policy. I looked from Ilara to Silas. I thought about my 32 years of silence. I thought about the thousands of species I had filed away into the dark, never once questioning if they had been given a fair shake. I have the audio file, I said, my voice gaining a new, steady strength. I have the proof that the census was falsified. I have the names of the people who signed off on the execution. Ilara's grip on my arm tightened. Is it enough to convene the tribunal? By itself? No, I said. But if I enter it into the public record during the preliminary hearing, if I force the High Counselor to respond to it in front of the representatives of the 40 species, then they won't have a choice. The scandal will be too big to bury. They'll have to call the Tribunal of Souls just to save their own skins. You're putting a target on your back, Kalen, Jack said, leaning against the wall. Once you push that button, there's no going back. You'll be KIA in the eyes of the hegemony. I'm already dead, Jax, I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. I've been dead for 30 years. I'm just now starting to breathe. Copy that, Alara said, her eyes shining with something that looked remarkably like respect. Then we move at dawn. The preliminary hearing starts at 800 hours. We bring the fire, Kalen. You just make sure the doors are open. I nodded and turned to leave. As I stepped back into the maintenance conduit, Unit 9 hovered in front of me. Kalen, the AI said, I have calculated the probability of your survival if you proceed with this plan. It is less than 5%. And what's the probability of the hegemony surviving if I don't? I asked. The machine was quiet for a long moment. Its sensors flickered, processing the vast interconnected data of a failing empire. Calculations suggest a total systemic collapse within 3 centuries. Then I'll take the 5%, 9, I said, stepping into the dark. It's better than the 0% we've been living with. I spent the rest of the night in a fever of activity. I didn't return to my office. Instead, I stayed in the bowels of the station, using a series of old disconnected terminals to bridge the human data chips with the hegemony's broadcast array. I was building a bomb, not one made of explosives, but one made of light and sound. I thought about the people of System Zero. I thought about the generations who had lived and died in the dark, planting seeds they would never see bloom. They hadn't done it for fame or for territory. They had done it because life is a stubborn, beautiful thing that doesn't know how to quit. As the first artificial sunlight of the station's morning cycle began to filter through the conduits, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an archivist of endings. I was a witness to a beginning. And as I prepared to walk into the great hall of the hegemony, I realized that Alara was right. The ghost of humanity wasn't here to haunt us. It was here to wake us up. The morning of the hearing was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a landslide. The air in Zenith Hub 42 felt thick, charged with the collective breath of thousands of beings who knew that something was about to break. I stood in the shadow of the Great Hall's entrance, watching the representatives of the hegemony file in. There were the Vylons, moving with their elegant, slow-motion grace, the Korra, their many limbs busy with data pads, and the stone-faced administrators of the High Council, their silver-trimmed robes shimmering with power. I felt the small data crystal heavy in my pocket. It felt like a piece of the sun. Stay frosty, Kalen, Alara's voice came through my private link. She was already inside, standing in the central pit with Silas and Jax. They were surrounded by a ring of security drones, but they didn't look like prisoners. They looked like judges. I'm ready, I whispered. Archivist Voss, a voice boomed from behind me. I turned to see Advocate Thon, the lead legal mind of the Territorial Acquisitions Division. He was a tall, thin man with skin like parchment and eyes that looked like they had been carved from cold marble. He was the one who had spent the last 24 hours trying to legislate the humans out of reality. I am surprised to see you here, Thon said, his voice a smooth, cultured rasp. I would have thought a man of your precise nature would be back in the vaults, correcting the minor clerical errors that these anomalies have caused. History isn't a clerical error, Advocate, I said, meeting his gaze. Thon smiled, a thin, cruel line. History is whatever we say it is, Kalen. That is the privilege of those who remain. These creatures, these humans, they are a ghost story, and we are about to close the book. I suggest you find a seat in the back. It would be a shame for your career to be caught in the crossfire of their final deletion. He walked past me, the smell of old paper and ozone lingering in his wake. I watched him go, feeling a surge of cold, hard anger. He really believed it. He really believed that because they had the power to write the report, they had the power to define the truth. Unit 9, I said into my link. Are the bypasses in place? Affirmative, Kalen, the AI replied. The broadcast array is primed. As soon as you initiate the transfer from the podium, the raw telemetry in the audio recording will be projected onto every screen in the station. It will also be broadcast to every outer rim colony via the emergency subspace beacons. Good, I said, taking a deep breath. Then let's go tell the galaxy that the ghosts are back, and they brought some things to sort out. I walked into the hall. The room was a massive amphitheater of tiered seating, rising up into the darkness of the station's upper levels. In the center, the three humans stood in a pool of white light, small and defiant against the weight of the Empire. High Counselor Verne sat on the elevated dais, her face a mask of professional indifference. She raised a hand, and the room went silent. This hearing of the Bureau of Biological Status is now in session, she announced. Her voice was amplified by the station's sound field, echoing like thunder. The matter before us is the reclassification of species Chardi 404. We have reviewed the preliminary data provided by the entities claiming to be Terrans. We have also reviewed the legal petition from the Territorial Acquisitions Division. She looked down at Alara with a look of profound boredom. Commander Vance, do you have any final statement before we issue our determination on your status as a non-viable anomaly? Alara stepped forward. She didn't look at the counselor. She looked up at the tiers of representatives, her eyes scanning the thousands of different faces. I don't have a statement for the council, she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. I have a question for the people of the hegemony. How many of you have noticed that your air is getting thinner? How many of you have seen the brown spots appearing on your garden worlds? How many of you have been told that efficiency is the reason your children are smaller and your lives are shorter? A murmur rippled through the gallery. Verne slammed her hand down on the dais. That is irrelevant to this proceeding. You are here to discuss your status, not to spread seditious rumors. It's not a rumor, Alara shouted over the noise. It's the same fire that almost killed us. And we are the only ones who can help you put it out. But your leaders would rather let you choke than admit they lied to you 1,200 years ago. Enough! Verne screamed. Security, remove them. Declare the final deletion immediately. The drones began to move, their weapons humming with lethal intent. Now, Kalen, Alara yelled. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted toward the administrative podium at the edge of the pit. 2 guards moved to intercept me, but I was faster, fueled by 30 years of suppressed truth. I slammed the data crystal into the override slot and hit the broadcast command. Unit 9, override the primary firewalls. Burn it into the net. The room exploded into light. Suddenly, High Counselor Verne was no longer the focus of the room. Every screen in the amphitheater, every screen on the entire station, flickered and then showed a grainy, ancient image of a blue planet struggling to breathe. And then the voice of the captain of the Hegemon 7 filled the air, distorted but undeniable. Recommendation: proceed with the extinction classification immediately. Let them rot in the dark. The silence that followed was more deafening than any explosion. It was the silence of a billion realizations happening at once. The representatives of the 40 species sat frozen, staring at the evidence of the crime that had built their empire. Advocate Thon was on his feet, his face pale with fury. This is a fabrication, an archivist's trick. Security, kill the feed. But the feed didn't die. Unit 9 had done its job too well. The data was everywhere. It was in the minds of the people, and it was in the heart of the machine. Alara Vance looked up at the High Counselor, a small, sad smile on her face. The ghosts are done talking, Counselor, she said. Now it's time for the living to decide what happens next. I stood by the podium, my chest heaving, my hand still resting on the crystal. I looked at the humans, who were watching the chaos with the same quiet patience that had carried them through 12 centuries of darkness. We had broken the wall. Now we just had to see what was on the other side. The aftermath of a truth bomb is rarely a clean explosion. In the Great Hall of Zenith, Hub 42, the air didn't just shatter, it turned into a thick, suffocating soup of disbelief and brewing violence. For 32 years, I had curated the silence of the dead. In 32 seconds, I had invited them to scream. High Counselor Verne didn't look like a leader anymore. She looked like a statue of ice caught in a sudden solar flare. Her jaw was set so tight I could hear the faint grinding of her teeth over the roar of the crowd. The gallery of representatives, creatures from 40 different star systems who had built their prosperity on the bedrock of hegemony law, were no longer sitting. They were leaning over the railings, their many-colored eyes fixed on the screens that still flickered with the ghost of a thousand-year-old crime. Silence. Shiren's voice finally tore through the din, amplified to a level that made my ears ring. This is a staged provocation. Security, detain Archivist Voss immediately. He has been compromised by biodigital pathogens from the anomaly vessel. I felt the heavy thud of boots on the deck behind me. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on Alara Vance. She was looking at me, not with the triumph I expected, but with a profound, somber weight. She knew what was coming. She had seen this play before, likely on 100 worlds that had burned before they learned to heal. "Kalen, check 6. Jax's voice crackled in my ear, his tone sharp and jagged. "The heavies are closing in. We're about to be boxed in like rats." "I'm not going anywhere, Jax," I whispered into the comms. 2 security sentinels, their armored plates humming with kinetic energy, grabbed my arms. Their grip was like industrial clamps, cold and indifferent. They didn't just pull me. They lifted me off my feet, dragging me toward the side egress. "Counselor!" It was the representative from the Vylon cluster, a spindly, luminous being whose voice sounded like the chiming of glass bells. "The audio signature on that recording is authenticated by the station's own core. You are asking us to ignore the testimony of our own machines. If the Terran extinction was a fabrication, then the territorial licenses we hold in the Outer Rim are legally null and void. We demand a full audit of the terminal vault." "The vault is a matter of sovereign security," Advocate Thon shouted, his face a mask of sweating parchment. "Any attempt to access it without a level 10 clearance is an act of war." I was dragged through the doors, the chaos of the hall fading into the muffled thrum of the station's secondary corridors. I wasn't being taken to a standard holding cell. We were moving deeper, past the hospitality tiers, past the maintenance levels, toward the dark heart of the station where the shadow resided. In the hegemony, we officially had no secret police. We had administrative harmonizers. We had structural integrity officers. But everyone knew about the expansionist wing, the men and women who viewed the galaxy as a ledger where the only thing that mattered was the bottom line. They threw me into a room that was less a cell and more an interrogation theater. It was circular, bathed in a harsh, ultraviolet light that made my vision swim. My hands were magnetically locked to a central pillar. "You really stepped in it, didn't you, Voss?" Advocate Thon walked into the light. He had discarded his formal robes for a simple gray tunic. He looked older, tired, but there was a predatory sharpness in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "I did my job, Advocate," I said, my voice rasping. "I corrected the record. The record was fine as it was," Thon said, pacing the perimeter of the room. "The record was a story that kept 40 species from tearing each other's throats out over a few handfuls of dirt. Do you have any idea what you've done? You haven't just exposed a crime. You've introduced a variable that the system cannot calculate. Hope is a chaos element, Kalen. It makes people irrational. It makes them think they deserve things they haven't earned." "They earned their lives," I snapped. "The humans didn't die out. We tried to kill them by omission. We ghosted an entire race for a mining claim. And look what it bought us." Thon turned on me, his face inches from mine. 1,200 years of expansion, a unified front against the dark. We are a civilization of trillions because we had the courage to make the hard choices. If we had let the humans keep their systems, we would have been embroiled in border disputes for centuries. We would have stagnated. And now you're stagnating anyway," I countered. "The soil is failing. The air is thinning. The humans brought a way to fix it, and you're trying to bury them again. Why? Because you're afraid of being wrong?" "Because being wrong is fatal for an empire," Thorne whispered. He reached out and touched the data port on my neck, his fingers cold. "The counselor has already authorized a total scrub of your sector. By tonight, the audio file will be gone. The witnesses will be re-educated. And the humans? Well, the humans are about to have a very unfortunate accident during their departure." My heart hammered against the magnetic pillar. "You can't kill them. The whole station saw them." "The station saw what we allowed them to see," Thon said, moving toward the door. By tomorrow, the narrative will be that the humans were a bioterrorist cell using deepfake technology to destabilize the hegemony. People will believe it because the alternative is too terrifying to contemplate. They need us to be right, Kalen. They're addicted to the certainty we provide. He paused at the door. You were a good archivist, Voss. You had a talent for the quiet. It's a shame you decided to get loud. The door slid shut, leaving me in the humming silence of the UV light. I closed my eyes, trying to find a way out, but there was nothing. No Unit 9, no override, just the weight of my own choices. But then, the darkness in the corner of the room shifted. Man, this place is a real dump, a voice whispered. I opened my eyes. Jax was hanging from a ceiling vent, his body nearly invisible in a stealth shroud that shimmered like oil on water. He dropped down with the grace of a cat, his boots making zero noise on the floor. Jax, I breathed. How did you? Slotted a few bypasses, zeroed a couple of sentries, he said, pulling a small laser cutter from his bag. He began working on my magnetic locks. The commander isn't exactly thrilled about the hospitality here. She told me to get you out before the harmonizers decided to scramble your eggs. They're going to kill you, I said, my words coming out in a rush. Thon, Vierne, they're planning an accident for your ship. You have to leave. Now. We aren't going anywhere without the bioseed data, Jack said, the magnetic locks clicking open with a shower of sparks. The hegemony net is locked down tight, but Silas thinks the old archive relay in the lower tiers still has an open pipe to the outer rim. If we can get there, we can broadcast the seed blueprints to every colony in the galaxy. Once the tech is out there, they can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I rubbed my wrists, the blood finally returning to my hands. The lower tiers are a labyrinth. You'll never find the relay without a map. That's why you're coming with us, Kalen, Jack said, tossing me a small, gritty-looking pulse pistol. Time to stop filing things and start making some new history. You ready to go loud? I looked at the weapon in my hand. It was heavy, alien, and looked like it had been through a war. Just like the people who made it. I've been ready for 30 years, Jax, I said. We climbed into the vents, the air tasting of recycled sweat and old machinery. As we moved through the station's skeleton, I realized that the humanistic theme I had spent my life ignoring was finally calling in its debt. For the first time, I wasn't protecting a record. I was protecting a future, and the cost was everything I had ever known. If Zenith Hub 42 was a body, the lower tiers were the entrails, messy, dark, and filled with the things the brain didn't want to think about. Jax and I moved through a forest of steaming pipes and humming power conduits. The air here was heavy with the scent of lubricant and the ozone of unshielded reactors. How's the commander holding up? I asked, ducking under a low-hanging coolant line. She's in the hospitality suite, playing it cool, Jax whispered. He was constantly checking a small handheld scanner. Silas is with her. They're keeping the shadow busy by pretending to negotiate a surrender. It's a classic bait and switch. But Thon isn't an idiot. He's going to realize the suite is a ghost trap any minute now. A ghost trap? Holographic loop, Jax grinned, though his eyes remained focused on the corridor ahead. Standard Terran street slang for a leave them guessing maneuver. We've got 20 minutes, tops, before they send in the sweepers. We reached a massive rusted hatch marked Relay Tier 99. This was the graveyard of technology, systems that hadn't been updated in 3 centuries because they were deemed functionally redundant. In the hegemony, if it didn't grow the empire, it didn't get a budget. This is it, I said, pointing to a console covered in a thick layer of gray dust. The ancient backbone of the station. It's slow, it's clunky, but it's hardwired into the deep space beacons. Thon can't shut this down from the bridge without cutting power to the entire sector. Jax jammed his data spike into the console. All right, Kalen, do your thing. I'll watch the door. This place gives me the creeps. Too much dead air. I wiped the dust from the screen. The interface was archaic, a series of blinking lights and command lines that predated the neural links. I felt a strange sense of nostalgia. This was the kind of tech I had studied in my early years at the Academy. It was honest. It didn't try to hide its intent. Unit 9, I whispered, hoping the AI could still hear me through the localized jammer Jax was carrying. I am here, Kalen, the voice crackled in my ear. It was weak, filled with interference. The station core is actively hunting for my subroutines. I have been forced to hide in the climate control buffers. I am currently a very sophisticated thermostat. I need you to bridge Jax's spike to the emergency beacon array, I said. We're uploading the bioseed blueprints. Kalen, Unit 9's voice flickered. The expansionist wing has authorized the use of Terminator-class drones in this sector. They are not looking to arrest you. They are authorized for permanent deletion. Thanks for the heads up, 9, I said, my fingers flying over the physical keys. Just keep the pipe open. The upload bar appeared on the screen. It was moving with agonizing slowness. 1%, 2%. Suddenly, the heavy hatch behind us began to glow. A white-hot line of light started to trace a circle in the metal. "We've got company," Jax yelled, dropping into a crouch and leveling his pistol. "They're using a thermal bore. They're not messing around." "How much longer?" I shouted, my eyes fixed on the upload bar. 10%. "We don't have 10 minutes." Jax fired a bolt of blue energy at the door just as it burst inward. A squad of harmonizers surged into the room. They weren't wearing the standard blue of the station guard. They were in matte black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind dark visors. These were the specialists, the ones who did the work that didn't go into the archives. "Drop the weapon," the lead harmonizer barked. His voice was modulated, sounding like a machine. Jax didn't drop it. He dove behind a power conduit, returning fire with a precision that was terrifying to behold. The air was filled with the hiss of pulse bolts and the smell of scorched ozone. "Kalen, keep the upload going," Jax screamed over the noise. "I'll hold them." I turned back to the console. 20%. It was too slow. Everything was too slow. Then the comms in my ear flared to life. It wasn't Unit 9. It was Ilara. "Kalen, get down." The ceiling of the relay tier didn't just break. It evaporated. A beam of focused starlight tore through the station's upper decks, slamming into the floor between us and the harmonizers. The force of the explosion threw me backward, my head hitting the console with a sickening crack. Through the smoke and the ringing in my ears, I saw a figure descending on a repulsor line. It was Ilara Vance. She looked like a Valkyrie of the Void, her armor glowing with the heat of the descent. She wasn't carrying a pistol. She was carrying something that looked like a long, metallic staff that hummed with a deep, resonant frequency. She landed between Jax and the black-clad squad. The lead harmonizer leveled his rifle at her, but before he could pull the trigger, Ilara swung the staff. A wave of kinetic force rippled through the air, knocking the entire squad off their feet as if they had been hit by a tidal wave. "Commander!" Jax scrambled to his feet, his face covered in soot. "You're late. We almost bought the farm." "The hospitality suite was getting a bit cramped," Ilara said, her voice calm despite the carnage around her. She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "Kalen, you all right?" The upload," I gasped, pointing at the console. The screen was cracked, but the bar was still moving. 40%. "We have to hold them for 3 minutes," I said, pulling myself up. "If they hit the console, it's over. The bioseed stays a secret, and the hegemony dies in the dark." "Then we don't let them hit the console," Ilara said. She turned to the door, where more black-clad figures were beginning to appear. "Silas is on his way with the ship. He's currently playing chicken with the station's defense turrets to get a clear line to this sector. We just have to hold the door." The next 3 minutes were a blur of violence and light. The expansionists didn't just send men. They sent shredder drones, small, multi-legged machines that climbed the walls and fired needles of concentrated plasma. Jax was a whirlwind of movement, his pistol barking rhythmically as he picked off the drones. Ilara was the anchor, her kinetic staff creating a barrier that nothing could penetrate. But for every drone they destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear. The shadow was pouring everything they had into this room. They knew that if the bioseed blueprints got out, their monopoly on life was over. "Kalen!" Silas's voice crackled over the ship-to-shore link. "I'm in position. I've got a lock on your beacon, but I can't hold the station's railguns for long. Wrap it up." 80%, I yelled. A pulse bolt grazed Ilara's shoulder, tearing through her armor. She didn't flinch, but I saw the flicker of pain in her amber eyes. She was human, after all. She could bleed. She could die. And she was doing it for a galaxy that had tried to erase her. "Why?" I asked as I punched in the final confirmation codes. Why are you doing this for us? After what we did to you? Alara didn't look back. She fired a kinetic pulse that crushed a shredder drone against the far wall. Because being better than your enemies is the only way to win a war, Kalen. If we let you die, then the people who tried to kill us were right. They would have won. But if we save you, then we prove that hope is stronger than greed. We prove that humanity wasn't a mistake. 90%. The lead harmonizer, the one who had spoken earlier, stepped through the smoke. He wasn't firing a rifle anymore. He was holding a thermal detonator. He knew he couldn't beat Alara in a fair fight. He was going to take the whole room with him. For the hegemony, he screamed. Not today, you buckethead, Jax yelled, throwing his metallic ball. The ball wasn't a toy, it was a high-frequency disruptor. It hit the detonator in the harmonizer's hand, freezing the countdown in a stasis field of blue light. 100%. Upload complete. The screen turned a bright, defiant green. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, the secrets of the bioseed were being received by every rebel cell, every fringe colony, and every scientist who had ever dared to dream of a green sky. It's out, I whispered. Silas, now, Ilara commanded. The wall behind us didn't just break. It was ripped away by the tractor beams of the persistence of memory. The charcoal-colored ship was hovering inches from the station's hull, its airlock already open. Let's move! Jax grabbed my arm, dragging me toward the yawning void of the airlock. We leaped across the gap, the vacuum of space a cold, momentary sting before the ship's internal atmosphere swallowed us. I landed on the deck plating, my lungs burning, my heart racing at a speed I didn't think was possible. I looked back through the closing airlock. I saw the relay tier, filled with smoke and the broken machines of the hegemony. I saw the black-clad harmonizers standing in the ruins of their silence. And then, the airlock sealed shut, leaving the shadow behind. We made it, I gasped, lying on the floor. Silas was at the helm, his hands moving over the biomechanical controls with a grace that was almost religious. We aren't out of the woods yet, Kalen. The hegemony fleet is scrambling. They're going to try and intercept us before we can make the jump to the outer rim. Alara walked into the cockpit, her wounded shoulder already being tended to by a small medical drone. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the toll this had taken. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been carrying the weight of 1,000 years on her back. You're a fugitive now, Voss, she said, her voice soft. No more archives. No more safety. You're a ghost just like us. I think I like being a ghost, I said, sitting up. It's a lot less paperwork. Glad to hear it, Jax said, sitting in the co-pilot seat. Because the next part of the plan is the real kicker. We're not just running, Commander, are we? Alara looked out at the stars. The vast, quiet stars that didn't care about hegemony laws or human history. No, Jax, we're not just running. We've given them the cure. Now we're going to show them how to use it. We're going to the outer rim colonies. We're going to start the healing. I looked at the bioseed sphere sitting on the central console. It was pulsing with a soft, green light, a heartbeat in the dark. I realized then that the turning point hadn't just been the revelation in the hall or the escape from the relay tier. The turning point was here, in this moment, on this ship. We had proven that truth was more than just a record. It was a catalyst. And as the ship's engines hummed, preparing to fold space, I knew that the hegemony's shadow was long, but it could never quite touch the light of a single, stubborn seed. Silas, Alara said, her voice regaining its command. Take us to the rim. Let's go plant some hope. The ship lurched as the quantum fold engines engaged. For a second, the universe was nothing but white light and the sound of 1 billion voices singing in the soil. And then we were gone, leaving the silence of Zenith Hub 42 to face the noise of its own awakening. I sat in the cockpit, watching the stars blur into long streaks of silver. I was 62 years old. I had spent most of those years believing that the world was a finished book, and my job was just to keep the dust off the cover. But as I looked at Alara, Silas, and even the gritty Jax, I realized that the book was only just beginning. Humanity hadn't walked into a meeting to beg for their lives. They had walked into a meeting to offer us ours. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about the ending. I was just happy to be part of the story. Hey, Kalen, Jack said, tossing me another one of those honey oat bars. Eat up. We've got a lot of work to do, and you look like you're about to flatline. I took a bite of the bar. It was sweet, earthy, and tasted like a world I had never seen, but was already starting to love. Thanks, Jax, I said. I'm good. I'm really, really good. The stars of the outer rim did not twinkle with the manicured clarity of the central hubs. Here, in the ragged edges of the hegemony, the light of the universe felt bruised and weary, filtered through the thick dust of dying nebulae and the industrial exhaust of 1,000 neglected mining outposts. We dropped out of Quantum Fold in the shadow of Oakhaven, a planet that had once been the jewel of the Vylon cluster, but was now little more than a sphere of gray ash and rusted infrastructure. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll as the gravity well of the planet took hold of the persistence of memory. For 32 years, my only experience with planetary descent had been through the sterile telemetry of a datapad. Seeing it through the forward view screen, seeing the atmosphere of a world struggling to draw breath, was like watching a person choke in silence. "We're coming in hot," Silas announced from the helm. His hands were fused with the biomechanical interface, the silver veins in the ship's console pulsing in a rapid, frantic rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. "The Hegemony Pursuit Squadron is 3 minutes out. They've got a lock on our drive signature. If we don't hit the dirt now, we're going to be a cloud of incandescent vapor before we can say hello." Commander Alara Vance stood behind him, her hands braced on the back of his chair. Her face was set in a mask of grim determination. "Do it, Silas. Take us down into the storm front. Their sensors won't be able to track our heat bleed through the localized lightning." "Jax, get the bio-seed array ready for deployment," she continued, turning toward the younger man who was currently elbow-deep in a secondary power conduit. "We've only got one shot at this. If we miss the planetary ley lines, the fungal network won't take, and this whole trip becomes a suicide run with no payoff." "Copy that, Commander," Jax said, wiping a smudge of grease from his forehead. "The gear is primed, but the power levels are looking a bit sketch. We took some heavy hits to the portside batteries back at the hub. I'm doing my best to bypass the blown fuses, but the ship is definitely feeling the burn. It's foobar if we take another direct hit." I stood in the corner of the cockpit, feeling profoundly useless. In the Hegemony archives, I was a god of information. Here I was just cargo with a guilty conscience. I looked at the data crystal in my hand, the one containing the blueprints for the bioseed. It felt like a small, cold stone, but I knew it was the only thing that could save the people down there. "Archivist Voss," Alara said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. "I need you to get to the comm station." "Me?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm an archivist, not a communications officer." "You're the only one on this ship who knows how the Vylons think," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a terrifying intensity. "We're about to drop onto their most sacred world without an invitation. They're already scared, they're already starving, and now they've got a hegemony kill squad and a ghost ship screaming toward their capital. If you don't talk them down, they'll fire their surface-to-air batteries before we even hit the clouds." "But I've never spoken to a civilian," I stammered. "I only deal with records." "Then think of them as living records, Kalen," Silas shouted over the roar of the atmospheric entry. "Think of them as the entries that haven't been finalized yet. Now move!" I stumbled toward the comms pod, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I put on the headset, the cold metal of the interface stinging my skin. The frequency was a mess of static and panicked chatter. The Vylon Planetary Defense Force was broadcasting on every channel, their voices sounding like the frantic chiming of broken glass. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of sovereign airspace," a voice screamed through the headset. "Power down your engines and prepare for boarding, or we will engage." I took a deep breath, trying to channel the calm, authoritative tone I had used during 1,000 administrative reviews. "This is Sub-Coordinator Kalen Voss, Senior Archivist of Terminal Records," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "I am aboard the vessel identified as the Persistence of Memory. We are not hostiles. We are carrying humanitarian aid and vital historical corrections." "Archivist Voss?" The voice on the other end paused, the chimes taking on a puzzled, slower rhythm. "We have reports from Zenith Hub 42. They say you are a fugitive. They say you are carrying a bioweapon." The hegemony lied to you about the humans for 1,200 years, I said, leaning into the microphone. They lied to you about the death of your world so they could strip mine it for the central hubs. Look at your sensors. Look at the ships chasing us. Do those look like the ships of an administration that cares about your survival? The silence on the other end lasted for 10 agonizing seconds. Outside the view screen, the gray clouds of Oakhaven were rushing up to meet us, lit from within by the orange glow of the ship's heat shield. "We see the Hegemony Squadron," the Vylon commander said, his voice now heavy with a desperate sudden hope. "They are powering up their main cannons. They aren't asking for our permission to enter the sector." "Because they don't see you as people anymore," I said, the truth of my own words hitting me like a physical blow. "They see you as a closing file, but we see you. We are here to help you breathe again. Please, clear the approach corridor." Another pause. Then the chimes sang a beautiful, rising note of defiance. "Approach Corridor 7 is open, Archivist. We will hold our fire. But if this is a trick, may the stars forgive you, because we won't." Silas didn't wait for a second confirmation. He rolled the ship into a steep dive, the internal inertial dampeners groaning under the strain. We punched through the cloud layer, and for a moment, the world was nothing but a chaotic blur of lightning and falling ash. And then we were through. The capital city of Oakhaven, a spire of crystalline towers that had once shimmered like diamonds, was a skeletal ruin. The great glass canopies that had protected the gardens were shattered, and the streets below were choked with the gray dust of a dying ecosystem. It was a graveyard that hadn't quite realized it was dead yet. "Jax, drop the primary bioseed canisters," Alara commanded. "Wait," I yelled, looking at the telemetry. "The planetary core is unstable. If we drop the canisters in the industrial district, the chemical runoff will neutralize the fungal growth. We have to go further north to the old arboretum." "That's right in the middle of the Hegemony's landing zone," Jax said, checking his scanner. "If we go there, we're sitting ducks. The squadron will be all over us like white on rice." "It's the only place the network will take," I insisted. "I've read the geological surveys from the original census. The arboretum sits on a natural spring line. If we seed it there, the moisture will carry the spores across the entire continent in 24 hours. Alara looked at me, then at the tactical display where the hegemony ships were already emerging from the clouds. "Silas, take us to the arboretum." "Jax, stay frosty. We're going to have to hold them off while the seed takes root." The persistence of memory swept low over the city, the charcoal-colored hull reflecting the dull orange light of the dying sun. We reached the arboretum, a vast circular crater filled with the stumps of ancient, fossilized trees. It was a place of profound sadness, a testament to what happens when hope is extracted for profit. The ship hovered a few meters above the ground, the belly hatches sliding open. 4 large metallic canisters, pulsing with that eerie green light, descended on repulsor lines. "Deployment in 5, 4, 3. Jax counted down. The air around us suddenly erupted in fire. The Hegemony Squadron had arrived, their pulse cannons tearing into the Arboretum's ruins. The ship rocked violently as a direct hit slammed into the aft shields. "Shields at 20% and falling," Silas yelled. "We can't stay here. We stay until the canisters seal," Alara shouted back, her hand reaching for her kinetic staff. I watched through the observation port as the canisters hit the ground. For a second, nothing happened. And then, a wave of emerald light exploded from the impact sites. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but an explosion of growth. Thick, glowing vines began to spiral out from the canisters, weaving through the gray dust and the dead trees with a speed that was impossible to comprehend. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my 62 years of life. It was the sound of a billion voices finally being allowed to sing. But the beauty was interrupted by the sound of grinding metal. A hegemony heavy interceptor, a massive, blocky vessel designed for planetary suppression, was descending directly toward the canisters. They weren't going to shoot them. They were going to crush them under the weight of their own ship. "They're going to kill the seed," I screamed. "Not on my watch," Alara said. "Silas, give me everything we've got in the kinetic thrusters. We're going to push them back." "Commander, the ship won't take the strain," Silas argued. The hull is already buckling. Then let it buckle, she replied. This isn't just a ship, Silas. It's a memory, and memories don't break that easily. I watched as the persistence of memory, a vessel that had survived 1,200 years of exile, charged directly at the hegemony interceptor. It was a battle of wills, the ghost of the past against the machine of the present. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I understood what the humans had known all along. Hope isn't a calculation. It isn't a number in a ledger. It's the choice to stand your ground when the whole universe is telling you to run. We slammed into the side of the interceptor, the sound of tearing metal filling the cockpit. The force of the impact threw me across the room, my vision turning white as I hit the bulkhead. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Alara's voice, steady and calm. Hold the line, she whispered. Just hold the line. The world was a kaleidoscope of static and pain. I struggled to open my eyes, my head throbbing with a rhythmic heat that felt like a dying star. When my vision finally cleared, I realized I was lying on the deck plating of the cockpit, surrounded by the smell of ozone and burnt insulation. The persistence of memory was silent. The constant, comforting hum of its engines had been replaced by a low, mechanical moan, the sound of a living thing trying to remember how to breathe. I looked up and saw Silas slumped over the console, his silver-veined interface flickering with a dim, sickly light. Silas, I croaked, my throat feeling like it had been scraped with sandpaper. The old man groaned, shifting his weight. I'm here, Kalen. But the ship? She's bled out. The kinetic shunt fried the primary core. We're on emergency batteries now. I pulled myself up, my knees shaking. Where are the others? Out there, Silas said, gesturing toward the viewscreen. The viewscreen was cracked, but the image it showed was something I will never forget for as long as I live. The hegemony interceptor had been pushed back, its massive hull tilted at an awkward angle against the ruins of the Arboretum. But it wasn't the ship that held my attention. It was the ground. The green light from the bioseed canisters had spread like a wildfire of life. The gray ash was gone, replaced by a carpet of vibrant, glowing moss that seemed to hum with its own internal light. The dead fossilized trees were being enveloped by emerald vines, their brittle bark being replaced by something supple and strong, and in the center of it all stood Alara and Jax. They were facing down a squad of harmonizers who had managed to eject from the damaged interceptor. The black-clad soldiers were hesitant, their rifles leveled at the two humans, but they weren't firing. They were looking at the ground. They were looking at the moss growing over their boots, at the flowers that were blooming in the middle of a battlefield. It's a glitch, one of the harmonizers yelled, his voice sounding hollow and terrified. It's a bioweapon. Kill it. He raised his rifle to fire at the moss, but Alara stepped forward, her kinetic staff held horizontally in front of her. She wasn't attacking. She was standing in the way. It's not a weapon, she said, her voice amplified by the natural resonance of the Arboretum. It's a second chance. Look at your sensors, soldier. Your suits are telling you the truth. The air quality has increased by 15% in the last 5 minutes. The soil toxicity is dropping. This world is trying to save you. Are you really going to shoot it? The harmonizer hesitated. I could see the reflection of the green moss in his dark visor. For a second, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. And then the sky broke. A second hegemony squadron dropped out of the clouds. But these weren't interceptors. They were the gold-trimmed vessels of the High Council's personal guard. High Counselor Viren had arrived to finish what she had started. Archivist Voss, a voice boomed from the sky, cold and final. You have committed an unforgivable act of ecological terrorism by introducing an uncatalogued biological entity into a sovereign hegemony world. You have signed the death warrant for the Vylon cluster. I scrambled to the comms pod, my fingers fumbling with the controls. Vern, look at what you're doing, I shouted. You're calling life terrorism because you didn't invent it. You're afraid because the humans found a way to fix the mess you made. The humans are a ghost, Vern replied, and her voice was filled with a chilling, clinical certainty. And ghosts have no place in a unified empire. All units engage, eliminate the anomalies and the traitor Voss, burn the Arboretum to the ground. The gold-trimmed ships opened fire, but they didn't hit the persistence of memory. They hit a wall of blue light. The Vylon Planetary Defense Force had arrived. The skeletal crystalline towers of the city were suddenly alive with energy, their ancient batteries powering up for the first time in centuries. A dozen Vylon ships, ragged and outdated but fiercely determined, rose from the ruins to form a shield around the Arboretum. "You will not burn this world again," the Vylon commander's voice sang through the comms. "We have spent 1,200 years dying for your efficiency. Today we choose to live for the truth." The battle that followed was a chaotic symphony of light and shadow. The Vylons were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Hegemony Guard lacked. They had a reason to fight that wasn't a paycheck or a promotion. They were fighting for the air in their lungs. Inside the persistence of memory, Silas was working frantically to restore power. "Kalen, I need you to get to the engine room," he yelled. "The biomechanical link is stalled. It needs a manual kickstart from the secondary shunt, but it requires a living touch to reset the neural sync." "I don't know how to do that," I cried. "There's no instruction manual for this," Silas said, his eyes meeting mine. "You have to feel it. You have to remind the ship why it's here. It's not just a machine, boy. It's the persistence of memory. Give it yours." I ran toward the engine room, my boots echoing against the buckling walls. The heart of the ship was a pulsing chamber of silver light, filled with a dense, sweet-smelling fog. In the center was the neural sync, a large translucent sphere filled with glowing filaments that looked like human neurons. I reached out and touched the sphere. For a second, the world vanished. I didn't see the engine room. I saw 1,000 years of human history. I saw the faces of the people who had lived in the underground bunkers of old Earth. I saw the tears of a mother as she watched the first green leaf sprout in a hydroponic lab. I saw the sweat of the engineers who had built the persistence of memory, knowing they would never live to see it reach the stars. I felt their hope. It wasn't a soft, gentle thing. It was a jagged, desperate, beautiful hunger. It was the refusal to be a footnote. It was the decision to keep planting seeds even when the sky was on fire. I gave them my own memories. I gave them the 32 years I had spent in the silence of the archives. I gave them the moment I had seen the humans walk out of the airlock. I gave them the realization that I wasn't just a record keeper. I was a part of the record. The sphere flared with a brilliant, blinding light. The ship didn't just power up, it screamed. A wave of silver energy surged through the hull, repairing the buckled plates and reigniting the quantum-fold engines. The persistence of memory rose from the ground like a phoenix, its iridescent charcoal hull glowing with a power that made the Hegemony gold trim look dull and pathetic. "Jax! Ilara! Get in here!" I yelled over the ship-wide comms. The two humans leaped back into the airlock just as the ship began to climb. We swept upward, our kinetic shields shattering the Hegemony drones that tried to block our path. "We're not leaving," Ilara said as she burst into the cockpit, her face covered in soot but her eyes blazing. "Silas, broadcast the bioseed data on the wideband. Not just the blueprints, but the real-time telemetry from Oakhaven. Show the whole galaxy what's happening down there." The broadcast went out. Every ship in the sector, every colony in the rim, every terminal in the central hubs saw the same thing. They saw a world that had been declared dead coming back to life. They saw the green moss spreading across the Crystal City. They saw the Vylon citizens walking out into the streets, their hands reaching out to touch the glowing vines. They saw that the hegemony was a lie. The hegemony fleet began to falter. The pilots of the Outer Rim colonies, men and women who had been told for generations that their worlds were beyond saving, started to power down their weapons. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were witnesses. High Counselor Vern's ship was alone now, a gold-trimmed island in a sea of green awakening. "You think this is over?" she screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You've destroyed the order. You've invited chaos into the stars." "No, Counselor," I said, leaning into the comms. "We've invited life, and life doesn't follow your orders." The persistence of memory turned away from the battle, its engines humming with a new, steady purpose. We weren't running. We were moving to the next world, and the next. As we climbed toward the stars, I looked down at Oakhaven one last time. The planet was no longer a gray ash heap. It was a glowing emerald, a beacon of hope in the dark heart of the hegemony. I sat in the navigator's seat, my hands resting on the console. I felt the ship's heartbeat beneath my palms, a steady, rhythmic pulse that felt like home. "You okay, Kalen?" Ilara asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. I looked at her and then at the stars. For the first time in 62 years, I didn't feel like I was watching a story end. I felt like I was writing the first chapter of a brand new one. "I'm more than okay, Ilara," I said. "I'm finally awake." Jax leaned back in his chair, a lopsided grin on his face. "Well, don't get too comfortable, archivist. We've got 11 more systems to seed, and I'm pretty sure the expansionist wing is going to be a real pain in the neck before we're through." "It's going to be a total cluster, man," I laughed. It was a sound I hadn't made in years, a short, sharp bark of genuine joy. "Then we'd better get started," I said. "We've got a lot of history to make." The persistence of memory vanished into a fold of space, leaving a trail of silver stardust in its wake. The galaxy was still in the dark, and the war was far from over. But as I watched the data streams of 1,000 worlds beginning to respond to our signal, I knew that the silence was finally broken. The ghosts of humanity had returned, and they weren't going anywhere. The slipstream between star systems used to be a place of absolute, sterile silence. To an archivist of the hegemony, the void was merely the negative space between data points, a vast nothingness where the only thing that mattered was the speed at which one could cross it. But as the persistence of memory drifted through the shimmering folds of the outer rim, the void felt different. It felt crowded. It felt loud. It was as if the very vacuum of space was beginning to hum with the collective realization of 1,000 worlds, that the laws they had lived by for 12 centuries were nothing more than a carefully curated set of lies. The immediate aftermath of Oakhaven was not a victory celebration. It was a scramble for survival in the middle of a systemic collapse. Inside the ship, the air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and the sharp metallic tang of scorched circuitry. Silas had managed to patch the primary core, but the vessel was limping, its iridescent charcoal hull scarred by pulse fire and the kinetic impact of the interceptor. Every light in the corridors was dimmed to emergency levels, casting long, dancing shadows that made the biomechanical walls look like the rib cage of a dying beast. I sat at the secondary monitoring station, my fingers flying over a holographic interface that I had jury-rigged to intercept hegemony fleet communications. I wasn't looking at archives anymore. I was looking at a war. "High Counselor Vierne has declared a total information blackout across the central hubs," I said, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet of the cockpit. "They're claiming the Oakhaven footage is a digital virus. They've authorized the harmonizers to use lethal force against any colony that attempts to broadcast the bioseed telemetry. They're calling it the Great Sanitization." Jax, who was lying underneath the console with a soldering iron in his hand, let out a dry, harsh laugh. "The Great Sanitization? Man, those guys really have a way with words. It sounds like they're trying to scrub a kitchen floor, not delete a few billion people. It's totally gone south for them, and they know it. You can't sanitize the truth once it's already in the dirt." "Is the broadcast still holding?" Ilara Vance asked, stepping into the cockpit. She had a fresh bandage on her shoulder, and her amber eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 10 hours. "It's more than holding, Commander," I replied, turning the screen so she could see. "The Vylons didn't just receive the data. They rebroadcast it on the emergency distress frequencies. The Cora systems just picked it up. The mining colonies in the belt are already starting to power down their refineries. They're refusing to send the quotas to the central hubs until the Terran anomalies are given a full hearing before a civilian council." Ilara leaned against the bulkhead, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "Then we did it. We broke the monopoly on reality. We broke it," I agreed. "But breaking it is the easy part. Now we have to figure out how to live in the pieces." The weight of that statement hung in the air. For the last 3 days, I had been running on pure adrenaline and a stubborn refusal to go back to the dark. But now in the quiet of the slipstream, the reality of my situation was finally sinking in. I was a 62-year-old man who had spent his entire life serving a machine that considered him a replaceable part. I had no home, no career, and my name was currently the most hated word in the hegemony administration. I was a traitor, a fugitive, and according to the latest bulletins, a bioterrorist. And yet I had never felt more alive. I looked at Silas, who was staring out at the streaking silver of the slipstream. He hadn't spoken much since we left Oakhaven. His connection to the ship seemed deeper now, more intimate. I could see the faint silver light of the neural sync reflecting in his eyes. "Silas?" I asked softly. "What are you thinking?" The old man turned his head slowly. "I'm thinking about the census, Kalen. Not the one you filed, but the one the universe keeps. For 1,200 years, the hegemony tried to count only what was useful. They ignored the beauty, the struggle, and the sheer, stubborn will of things that didn't fit their ledger. They thought they could manage the galaxy like a warehouse." He reached out and touched the console, his fingers tracing the veins of light. "But a warehouse is dead space," he continued. A forest is a conversation, and the conversation just got a lot more interesting." Jax crawled out from under the console, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Look, it's not all sunshine and roses, guys. The expansionist wing still has the heavy hitters. They've got the dreadnoughts and the orbital platforms. They're going to try and box us in at the Sol gates. They won't let us back into System Zero without a fight that'll make Oakhaven look like a tea party. It's going to be a real slugfest." "Then we don't go back through the gates," Alara said, her voice regaining its command. "We go through the back door, the old survey routes that the hegemony abandoned 5 centuries ago. They're treacherous, filled with gravitational anomalies and space debris, but they're not patrolled." "That's a death trap," Jax noted, though he didn't sound particularly worried. "The radiation alone will cook our sensors in 30 seconds. Then we'll fly by sight," Alara said, "like our ancestors did." I looked at the tactical map. System Zero, the home of the humans, was a tiny golden dot at the edge of the screen. It was the place that I had been told was a tomb. For 1,200 years, I had believed that Earth was a lesson in failure, a warning against the dangers of environmental self-destruction. But now it was a beacon. "Kalen," Alara said, turning to me, "you're processing a lot. I see it in your eyes. You're wondering if you made the right choice." I looked at her, and then at the glowing seed sphere on the console. "I spent my life filing away the dead, Alara. I was the man who made sure the archives were neat and the endings were final. I thought I was protecting history, but history isn't a book you close. It's a garden you tend. I didn't make a choice to be a traitor. I made a choice to be a part of the living." "That's the most human thing I've heard all day," Jax chirped, leaning back in his chair. "Welcome to the species, Voss. It's messy, it's loud, and the pay is terrible, but the views are spectacular." The ship lurched as we adjusted our course, moving away from the safety of the known space lanes and into the uncharted dark. I watched the data streams flicker on my screen, messages from a dozen different species, all asking the same questions. Who are the humans? What is the bioseed? Is it true that the air can be clean again? I realized then that my work wasn't over. It was just changing scale. I wasn't an archivist of endings anymore. I was the archivist of the Great Awakening. I was the one who would document the first breaths of a dozen dying worlds. I was the one who would tell the story of how the ghosts of humanity came back to save the people who had forgotten them. "We're crossing into the old reach," Silas announced. "Watch your 6, everyone. The gravity is about to get real flaky." I strapped myself into the navigator's seat, feeling the steady rhythmic pulse of the ship beneath my palms. For the first time in 62 years, I wasn't looking for a period at the end of a sentence. I was looking for the first word of a new paragraph. The void wasn't empty, it was full of potential. And as we dove into the radiation fog of the abandoned sectors, I knew that no matter what happened next, the record would never be the same again. We were the glitch that changed the universe, and we weren't done yet. The transition from the radioactive fog of the old reach into the Sol system felt like waking up from a long, gray fever dream into a world of brilliant, impossible color. As the persistence of memory cleared the Kuiper belt, the distorted telemetry on our screens smoothed out into a crisp, clear map of a system that had been extinct for 12 centuries. But it wasn't a graveyard. There, orbiting the gas giants, were massive, shimmering habitats that looked like spun glass. The moons of Saturn were no longer desolate rocks, but glowing lanterns of human industry, their surfaces covered in the soft, emerald moss of the bioseed. And as we approached the third planet, System Zero Earth, I saw a sight that made the breath catch in my throat. The planet was blue, a deep, vibrant, aching blue that I had only seen in the oldest, most degraded files of the Central Archives. Clouds, white and swirling like silk, moved across continents that were no longer brown and scarred, but lush with a green that felt like a shout of joy across the vacuum of space. "Home," Silas whispered, and for the first time, his voice was filled with a fragility that made him sound every bit as old as he was. "It's still there. After everything, it's still there." "We're receiving a hail," Jack said, his fingers dancing across the console with a new kind of reverence. "It's not a hegemony frequency, it's a wideband transmission from the surface." The main view screen flickered to life. It didn't show a council chamber or a high command center. It showed a field. A vast, rolling field of tall grass swaying in a breeze that I could almost feel through the screen. A woman stood in the middle of the field, her hair white and wild, her skin tanned by a sun that didn't need a station filter. "Welcome back, Persistence," she said, her voice warm and carrying the sound of birds in the background. "We saw you coming through the reach. We've already got the tea on." Ilara Vance stepped forward, her hand resting on the console. "We brought a guest, Mother, a man who helped us bring the light back to the rim." The woman on the screen looked at me, her eyes crinkling in a way that suggested she had spent a lifetime laughing. "Kalen Voss," she said, "the man who files the ghosts. We've heard a lot about you. You look like you could use a place to sit that doesn't hum." I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on my cheek. The descent into the atmosphere of Earth was nothing like the violent, fiery entry at Oakhaven. It was a gentle surrender to gravity. The ship didn't groan. It seemed to sigh with relief as the thick, clean air took hold of its wings. We landed in a valley surrounded by mountains that reached up into a sky so blue it felt like a holy thing. The airlock opened, and for the first time in my life, I stepped onto a world that wasn't made of steel and composite. The smell hit me first. It was overwhelming. The scent of damp earth, of blooming jasmine, of rain on hot stone. It was the smell of life in its most chaotic, unarchived form. I took a step onto the grass and my knees buckled. I fell to the ground, my hands sinking into the cool, soft soil. It wasn't gray dust. It wasn't industrial waste. It was dirt. Rich, dark, living dirt. Eller and Jax walked out behind me, but they didn't try to help me up. They understood. They stood there, letting the wind pull at their hair, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a riot of orange and violet. "I've spent 62 years in a cage," I whispered, clutching a handful of the soil. "I've spent 62 years thinking that the galaxy was a library where the books were all finished." "It's not a library, Kalen," Ilara said, kneeling beside me. "It's a garden, and gardens require work." The weeks that followed were a blur of transformation. The news of our arrival on Earth and the success of the bioseeding on Oakhaven acted like a spark in a dry forest. The hegemony didn't collapse with a bang. It began to dissolve from the edges inward. The great sanitization failed because the people refused to be cleaned. One by one, the outer rim colonies declared their independence, not through war, but through the simple act of planting the bioseeds we had broadcast. High Counselor Viren and the expansionist wing found themselves commanding a ghost empire. Their dreadnoughts were useless when the crews refused to fire on planets that were finally starting to breathe. The authority of the central hubs rested on the control of resources, but once the humans shared the technology to heal the land, that control evaporated like mist in the morning sun. I chose to stay on Earth. I knew that my place wasn't in the archives anymore. I spent my days working in the arboretums, learning the delicate art of biosyncing with the soil. My hands, once soft and clean from a lifetime of handling data pads, were now calloused and stained with the earth. I was no longer a sub-coordinator. I was a gardener of the living record. One evening, about 4 months after our arrival, I sat on the porch of a small wooden house overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the fields of bioseed grass. Jax was nearby, trying to teach a group of local children how to build a short-range radio from salvaged hegemony parts. Silas was in the garden, his hands moving with the same grace he had used to pilot the ship. Ilara walked up the steps and sat beside me, handing me a cup of the hot, brown drink the humans called coffee. It was bitter, strong, and tasted like reality. "The Vylons sent a message today," she said. "They finished seeding the entire northern continent of Oakhaven. They're calling their new capital Voss's Rest." I laughed, the sound clear and easy in the mountain air. "That's a bit much, don't you think?" "I was just the guy who opened the door. People need a name for the moment they started to hope again," Alara said. "You gave them that name." I looked out at the valley, feeling a profound sense of peace that I had never known in the sterile halls of Zenith, Hub 42. I realized then that the archive I had spent my life protecting was still there, but it wasn't in a server. It was in the grass, in the trees, in the laughter of the children, and in the stubborn, persistent memory of a species that refused to die. I find myself thinking back to the day I first saw the persistence of memory docking at Bay 7. I remember the cold, bureaucratic confidence I felt as I looked at the file for species ID 404. I believed in the finality of the record. I believed that once something was declared extinct, it was gone, reduced to a string of digits in a cold server. I thought my 32 years of service had made me an expert on endings, a guardian of the ultimate truth that all things eventually fall silent. How foolish I was. Looking back, I see a man who was living in a world of shadows, mistaking the absence of light for the absence of life. I was so preoccupied with the weight of the past that I couldn't see the seeds of the future growing right under my feet. My journey wasn't just across the light years between the hubs and the rim. It was the distance between a ledger and a garden. I learned that life isn't a problem to be solved or a resource to be managed. It is a choice that must be made every single morning. I learned that hope isn't a glitch in the system. It is the system itself, the underlying code that allows us to keep climbing even when we are at the bottom of the fall. I am no longer the man who files away the dead. I am a witness to the fact that nothing is ever truly over as long as there is someone left to remember the song. We are not defined by the fires that burn us, but by the green that grows from the ashes. I sit here now, with the dirt of a reborn world under my fingernails and the scent of jasmine in the air, and I find myself wondering about the stories we tell ourselves to stay comfortable in the dark. I spent 62 years believing that I was a finished product, a minor character in a story that had already been written. I thought my purpose was to keep the dust off the memories of those who had failed. But the humans showed me that the most dangerous thing you can do is decide that the record is closed. I wonder, as you look at the walls of the world you have built around yourself, how many things have you declared extinct in your own heart? How many dreams, how many hopes, how many versions of yourself have you filed away under non-viable because it was easier than facing the fire? What if I told you that the silence you hear isn't the end of the story, but just the space before the first note of a new one? What would happen if you decided, right now, to walk out of your own docking bay and see what's waiting in the light? I think you'd find that the ghosts aren't haunting you, they're just waiting for you to invite them home. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the valley in a soft, emerald twilight. I took a final sip of my coffee, stood up, and walked down into the grass to join the others in the planting. My work was just beginning,